Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be doing this. I understand the need for clarity. Unfortunately, until things are really crystal clear in our minds, we hear Torah ideas from the right and from the left, and we go to this class and that class. But to have that eagle eyes view of, okay, God, Torah, Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, mitzvot, philosophy, the eagle eye view is what I aim for. And it's my passion. And in order to get an eagle eye view, my goal would be for you to give you the kind of tools that you could circulate anywhere in the world and be able to answer at least all the basic questions about Judaism. So therefore, it makes it a really useful class. And even more so, God willing, you'll all be parents. I have 11 children myself, and I'll tell you one thing, 15 grandchildren. One of the things that kids do is they ask questions, and a lot of them, and every day. And we don't want to wing it. We actually want to know what we're saying, because our kids are going to take what we say at face value, they'll repeat it, and they'll incorporate it. So the clearer we have Judaism, the clearer we have Torah in our minds, the better off our kids will be in terms of their feeling of confidence with Judaism. So today we're going to be speaking about God. Let's start off with the God question. First off, why is this question important? The simple answer is that there is no question in this world more important than the God question. There isn't. I once had a student who said to me, I'm going to work. I said, maybe you should go study a little, learn a little about Judaism. He said, well, I don't know if I believe in God. So I said, stop. He said, stop what? I said, stop everything. He said, what do you mean stop everything? I said, stop what you're doing. Whatever you're doing, you're working, stop working. You're in school, stop school. What you need to do is figure out whether there's a God or not. Why is that important? So on a very, very basic, I'm always going to stay with logic here, okay? No emotional stuff, just all logic, okay? The reason that it's so important is if there is a creator, then we're the creations, and there's a purpose for creation. And it's upon me, it behooves me, it makes sense to figure out what the purpose is. If there's no God, then the world is chaos. And then I could do what I want when I want it, as long as maybe it's not hurting someone else, as long as, I could feel good about myself when I look in the mirror. Literally everything in this world changes, whether we are designed or whether we're a product of accident. There can be no debate about whether the ramifications of creation versus chaos. So if the world is chaos, it doesn't mean that we have to go around looting and breaking windows and hurting people. There's still a concept that we want to get along, and therefore, you rub my back, I'll rub you. We'll do for each other. We're not going to hurt each other. But the morality and the purposefulness, the meaning of why I get up every morning is not simply to survive and not simply to have pleasure, but it's for a cosmic purpose that may transcend my lifespan. It may transcend my lifespan. And Judaism very firmly believes in that. So the God question always is the first question that needs to be addressed. And I'm going to try to address it. Obviously, great philosophers and great scientists on both sides of the aisle have spoken about this question. I don't just dabble in the science. I actually study science. I lecture in science. So I'm going to try to throw that in, but I don't want to lose everyone with the science. But a lot of it is that, because the more we understand actually how the world is built, the more indication we'll be able to find whether it is chaos versus design, okay? So I used to be a rabbi at UCLA for many years. And I would stop a student and say, hey, you're Jewish, you're proud of being Jewish, state of Israel, all that stuff. And then I would, sometimes the conversation would go like, okay, are you do you believe in a creator? Now, that's not my pickup line. I don't go around saying, hey, are you a God believer? That would be very missionizing of me, and I'm not. I'm very, very just straightforward. But I'm curious sometimes when we have a conversation, because it is a legitimate question. And usually people say one of three things. Yeah, I do believe. No, I don't believe. Or I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm an agnostic. So I'm an atheist. I know there's no God. I'm agnostic. An agnostic can mean I'm 99% sure there is, but I doubt it a little bit. Or I'm 99% sure that there isn't, but I do leave room for a creator in this world. And a believer says, wow, I have enough proof that I believe that the world is created, right? I don't have to see God's nose or ears, if God had nose or ears, to know God exists, but there's enough there for me to see, to understand that there is a creator. Like I'm convinced, okay? Some say I'm not convinced, I'm not sure. Some say I know that there isn't. Now, out of those three possibilities, only one of them would be considered the non-intellectual stance to take. And the non-intellectual stance is which one? That is always going to be the atheist. The atheist is the non-intellectual stance because you never can know a negative. You can never know a negative. I can never know that something doesn't exist. The only thing I can say is I haven't figured out a way to prove that it does exist. So, for example, in quantum theory, not exactly Schrodinger's cat, but like that concept, if there was ever, for example, a cat that was on the floor next to me, on some level it's still there. Not only is it on some level still there, but even though I can't go backwards because the arrow of time goes forwards, I can't technically prove there's not a cat there. In the same way that things can look a certain way, and yet science has learned over time that things are not that way. I used to think that this computer was solid, and now I know it's mainly empty space. I learn more and more. I cannot know a negative, and very often, if things look a certain way, if I spend enough time, I will see a way of being able to prove it. And sometimes science just has to catch up. The technology has to catch up. So to say I am a believer, that's logical. Sometimes I have enough proof to say that, wow, I have a certitude that there is a God. I'll give you a science example of that. Until recently, we've never seen a planet outside of our solar system. Now, does that mean we didn't know a planet exists? No, we know. Not only do we know planets exist, we even know their chemical makeup. We know their mineral makeup. How do we know? We can't see them because planets don't have an independent source of light. They're not a star. So we know planets exist based on the wobble of the star that they orbit. The star wobbling tells me that a planet is tugging on them. I didn't see the planet, but the indication of the wobbling star tells me that a planet is tugging on it. I don't have to see something, but the indication, the ancillary proof, the background tells me that, wow, there must be a planet there. When I say I see enough to believe that the world is not a product of chaos, it means I did enough research to say that based on crunching numbers, there's not enough time in the universe for X, Y, and Z to have been designed chaotically. It seems to show design, and I'm convinced. Or you could say, no, I'm going to leave room for the door open that maybe scientifically we haven't figured out the mechanism, how these things organize themselves. But eventually, maybe 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, who knows how long, but eventually we'll figure it out. But to say, I know there's no God, that's not scientific. Also, I would just share with you that almost always when I speak to someone, they say, I'm an atheist, I'll usually say, okay, which books have you read on the subject? And usually the answer will be none. Like, I just don't believe in God. Like, based on what? Like, what have you read? Which philosophical book? Well, I saw a video by Sam Harris, or something. Like, really? You're basing everything that you do in life based on a YouTube video? That's really nuts. I'm just throwing that out there just to start with. When someone says to you, do you believe in God? The first stance you take is, I'm either not sure, or you could be at the point where you say, wow, I'm convinced. But to say, I know that there's no God, you're in for trouble. You could say that, but then you're a faith believer. That's called a faith believer. Even though it sounds the opposite, I have faith that they're never going to find a way to prove that there's a God. And so then you're a blind faith believer. So atheists are blind faith believers. Okay, so I know it sounds like it should be the opposite, but trust me, that's how it is. That's how we make our decisions in life, either based on circumstantial evidence or I'm not sure. Actually, if we are Jews, one of our names are Yisrael. Yisrael. The word Yisrael comes from the line Kisarisa im Elokim vatuchal. You struggled with the notion of God and you overcame. So it's actually our job to struggle with the God question. And we struggle with it and we beat it up and we keep on studying more because at the end of the day, we know that that's the most important question that needs answering. It is the number one question in life. Does life have purpose, or are you a product of an accident? Okay, I can't stress that enough, but that's why we're beginning this. That's why we're starting with the God question. Okay, now, when I say the word God, I always get into trouble. And that's why very often I will change the word God to creator. And the reason why is, unfortunately or fortunately, you can debate the point, but God and religion in the past has proven both to be somewhat anti-scientific, or maybe even against science, and there seems to be sort of this blind faith notion with the word God that's attached. So when I say God, I think, okay, the man in the sky who looks for the beard, sort of like Zeus, right, or some person ready to strike me down with lightning. And the baggage of the word God makes the word God almost ineligible to be used in this conversation. Very often, if a student says, well, I don't believe in God, I'll say, well, the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. Because you're picturing like a scary guy in the sky. So I don't picture, that's not how I picture it either. It's not a scary guy in the sky. So I'll use the word God interchangeably, but I like the idea of creator better, because God is an English word, and there are many words that different religions use for God. In Hebrew, we'll call it Elohim. In Islam, they call it Allah. There are many words for it, but what it means is there's a single source of space-time and matter. A polytheist would say that there are many sources of space-time matter. That's much more problematic, because then you'd have to explain where all those guys came from. When we explain God, so there is a question that needs to be answered. Where did God come from? We'll try to address that as well. But if there's no God, then we have a much more difficult question, which is, where did everything else come from? Now, so it used to be that the average person of faith didn't like or didn't believe in science. We know that Galileo, when he's announced the sun does not orbit around the earth, but the earth orbits around the sun, he got into tremendous trouble with the church. The church says, how dare you? The earth clearly is the center of the universe, and clearly the sun is not as important, so the sun must orbit the earth. And they made him recant his statement, which he did because he didn't want to die. They were threatened to kill him. So they said, go back on your words and announce publicly that it is the sun that orbits the earth and not the other way around. So he announced that, and they still didn't trust that quietly he wouldn't tell his friends, oh, by the way, I just said that because I didn't want to die. So they kept him under house arrest, the rest of his life. Okay, so for great reason, people who claim to be religious or subscribe to religion seem to be at odds with the science. And it evolved to the point that they've become categories. So if you believe in God, you're probably a Republican. You probably drive a pickup truck. You may eat roadkill. You may have a MAGA hat. You've got, it's all like one package. You know what I'm talking about? And if you don't believe in God, then you probably live in New York City, maybe LA, maybe Eugene, Oregon. You're probably a Democrat, maybe you're a liberal. You're pro this, anti this, pro this, right? All of those, it's all one big fat package, which is a little bit insane. I used to have a radio show. I have a very interesting history. I'll leak it as we go. I had a radio show in New York, and I used to speak about climate change a little bit. One of my shows I spoke about it, and I said, yeah, I believe it's true, and I believe this was years ago already. And they said, Rabbi, I thought you're an Orthodox rabbi. How can you believe in climate change? I said, what does A have to do with B? Wait, I have to fit into a package? Look, I know how it used to be when I was young. There was snow all everywhere. The holiday of Sukkot, our sukkah collapsed from the heaviness of the snow. Today, it's like balmy and 50 during Sukkot. I don't have to be how much of it is human made, but the point is that we don't have to be put in a package. We're not a package. And I can be into human rights. I can be into climate change. I can be into many things and still believe in God. And A has got nothing to do with B. And unfortunately, on the college campuses and beyond, it's like, I have to accept the whole package. If I speak out about anything, then I've gone to the other side. It's a little bit distressing. So for many years, religion and science were at odds with each other. And eventually, science was able to explain many things that primitive man could not explain. And it bothered those religious figures, particularly in the church, by the way. Islam was much more progressive earlier on, although it changed. I'm not leaving Judaism out of this for a moment. I'll explain to you why. But at some point, every new sort of invention or realization or technology or discovery that came out, it became the science versus faith. And that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. If there is a God, then you know how he made the world? Through science. That's what science is. Science tells me how and God tells me why. They're not at odds with each other. Science will tell me how A, B, and C. Science shouldn't be telling me why. There's a motivation because science didn't create itself. Gravity didn't create gravity. But science tells me how. It allows me to understand. Religion done properly should tell me why, should give it context. So for many years, even Jewish people have been thrown into the Judeo-Christian pile, that one lump where people thought, okay, Jews like Christians probably don't believe, or the rabbis probably don't believe in things like evolution. And I say, what are you talking about? Of course we believe in evolution. Evolution is mentioned by Nachmanides 1,000 years ago. It's mentioned by Hillel 2,000 years ago. We actually figured out evolution long before Darwin. Did you know that? You learn a lot of things. You're going to be very proud to be Jewish. So evolution is one of those things very clearly in the Talmud, very clearly. So the very fact that things evolve and change is wonderful, right? That's a mechanism. It's a really useful mechanism. Now, what we don't believe in is random evolution. In other words, we believe evolution is directed. But the mechanism is that we see it today. We see with the COVID virus evolving in front of our eyes. We see things evolve. Now, we've never actually seen macroevolution. We've seen microevolution. We've never seen macroevolution. But even if that was the case, it wouldn't bother us. There's a very interesting Nachmanides who also quotes the Zohar that says that when God created the world, he created one point, one like a dot, like one point. And that was the only thing that was created ex nihilo, which means something from nothing. There was nothing, and now all of a sudden there's something. And then from that point, everything else evolved. What does that sound like? That sounds like science, doesn't it? That's what it says. That singularity, from the singularity, everything evolved. So Judaism has no issue with that. We can get much more into that. But let's look at the world and design versus a world of chaos. And I'm going to start off with a sort of, I guess it's an interesting story. Because I lecture on science, when there's somebody who's made a great discovery, I try to wine and dine them. I learned this from my grandpa, who is a very influential man. And he said, no matter how famous somebody is, most people will let you take them out to eat if the restaurant is a good enough restaurant. So, buy a really great steak and let's take the guy out to eat. So in 2016, the LIGO lab, there's 3 labs of LIGO, laser interferometer. The LIGO lab was trying to prove Einstein's theory that because space and time are one fabric, you can have a disturbance in space-time, and it's called gravitational waves. So I'm not going to get into it, but essentially, when you've got a great enough disturbance, like 2 major black holes colliding, you could have such a big ripple in space-time that the ripple, like a sheet rippling in the wind, will eventually reach Earth, and we could skip a fraction of a second because the space-time rippled. Now, you wouldn't feel like time rippled. You wouldn't feel anything. But it can be measured, and it's measured using lasers because light has an absolute value, a constant speed. And therefore, if you have light going vertically and horizontally like this, so whichever way the ripple is coming from, it will skip a fraction of a second. So either the X or the Y will jump ahead by a fraction of a second. Anyways, this is what Einstein theorized 100 years ago. It's never been able to be proven, and Einstein said it can never be proven. It's impossible to prove because, number one, where in the sky would you point your information? Number two, they did not know how to harness lasers in those days. For many reasons, he thought it was impossible. But human beings tell us something can't be done. What are we going to do? We're going to figure out a way. And we figured out a way, and in 2016, LIGO, they waited like almost 40 years on this. It's like amazing. They kept tweaking the instruments. There are some people whose career started and ended without ever experiencing gravitational waves. Horrible. But eventually, in 2016, they did discover gravitational waves, and the head of LIGO was a fellow by the name of Peter Solson. So I knew he's going to be up, or LIGO's going to be up for a Nobel Prize for Science, which they did. They won in 2017. So when I heard about this, I wrote him a letter, and I said, hey, can I take you out to lunch? So he said he'll be in town in 2 months. I took him out to a nice kosher Italian place in Manhattan. And we're schmoozing, and I'm asking him questions. And then in the middle of our talk, I said, can I ask you a question? When they discovered, after 40 years, gravitational waves, what was your first reaction? Like your whole career was spent looking at a monitor, looking at nothing. And then all of a sudden, your life, and by the way, gravitational waves changes everything. I'm not going to explain why now, but it changes how we look at science. It changes how far we can go back in the universe to the Big Bang. It changes everything. It's such a big, big, big discovery. Gives us another way to measure distance besides the Big Bang echo, and besides the color shift. Now it gives us a third way to measure distance and time. It's tremendous. I said, what was your first reaction? You know what he said? He said, first off, I was in temple when it beeped. I said, Peter Solson, you're Jewish? Like, I did not even realize. He goes, yeah, I'm Jewish. He said, I was in temple, and I did not bring my cell phone to temple because it's disrespectful, right, to be on your phone in temple. So I didn't bring it. He said, when I got back, and it was on Rosh Hashanah. Of all days, it was on Rosh Hashanah. So he said, when I got back home, my phone had blown up, my computer, my emails, everyone was congratulating me. So I wasn't even one of the first people to hear about it. I said, that's crazy. What's the first thing you did? And you know what he said? Listen to me, my friends. He said, the first thing that I did was I bought myself a mezuzah and tefillin. Tefillin. Really? You are today the most significant scientist in the world. You just discovered gravitational waves. And your first reaction is to buy a mezuzah for your door and tefillin? He said, yeah. He says, if you can acknowledge the preciseness of gravitational waves and their implications and not believe in a creator, then you've shut your brain off. You've shut your brain off. He said, it backs up the cosmological constant in such a beautiful way, you got to believe in a creator after this. Now, here you have a guy who next year wins a Nobel Prize for Science. We're not talking about some dumbo, in a Republican red state who doesn't know anything versus a smart liberal professor in some liberal arts college. We're talking about a fellow who is about to win the Nobel Prize for Science, and he says, this is the very thing we're looking for when we're looking for the cosmological constant. So here's the point. You have a choice. Do I believe in God? Do I believe in a creator? Or do I believe in chaos? Now, the more things seem to be organized in a logical way, the harder it is to say they're a product of chaos. There's a concept, it's a law of thermodynamics called entropy, which means that things go to a state of disorganization and not organization. So a glass falls off the table, it goes from a whole glass to a broken glass. It doesn't flip back on the table and become a whole glass. Things go in a chaotic way. Even if they're the slightest bit off, you would imagine a traffic jam, right? So somebody is driving and the traffic is flowing, and then there's an accident on the other side of the road, the other side of the highway. And a person's driving and he says, I would never want to cause a traffic jam, so I'm going to keep driving. I'll just, as we're driving, I will glance, but I'm not going to rubberneck. Ever happened to you? Like, I don't want to be the one to slow down, so I'm just going to keep driving, but I'll just, for a second. That second where you may have let off on the gas or touched the brake for 1 second, in a few minutes, there's going to be heavy traffic and it's going to be bumper to bumper. Because things go from a state of organization to a state of chaos. That's how it is. Our world shows incredible organization, the opposite of chaos. I'm going to give you an interesting example. If we find water on another planet, what could that mean? There might be life. Water, right? Water is what we need to create chemical reaction. There's no chemical reaction without water, right? So we need water to create life. What about intelligent life? What is the minimum that we need to say, wow, intelligent life exists on a certain planet? What do we need to find? We need to find a square rock or pillar. Let's take a pillar just so we could visualize it. Let's say we were to go onto a planet and find something that is square. A square pillar tells me intelligent life exists. Why? Because there's no squares in nature. A square is not a natural form. It's not a natural design. Many circles. A square is actually a very fiendishly hard shape to create, because you got a 90-degree angle, which four chances in 360. You could have that. But it's a very utilitarian and aesthetically pleasing angle, the 90-degree angle, right? When you've got two 90-degree angles connected to each other, so then the chances of that happening randomly are 4 in 360 times 4 in 360. A third one connected, on the bottom, you got to times it by another 4 in 360, and then a fourth one times by another 4 in 360. So it's a very, very, very unlikely. You can go to a stream or a creek. We used to go to the creek when I was young. Used to go rock jumping, rock skipping, and we would look for like the perfect stone. And we had stones that looked, some of them, because of the way the water rubbed against them, they had like a really cool look. None of them were real squares, not an actual square. One's sort of rectangular, they got a little wider at the bottom, but a square is very difficult. So, according, this is a NASA thing. If NASA were to go and find a square, we would say intelligence exists. Now, my friends, what is more complex? A square or a peacock? With a beating heart, with an immune system, with eyes that can see in color, with hearing, with reflexes, or a whale, or DNA, or a human brain? A square rock says intelligence. So when I meet this student and he says, "Oh, I'm an atheist, the world came by chaos," really? Okay, let's how old would the world be according to science? How old are we talking about? How old? So, according to science, and we can speak about what Judaism does with this, but the maximum age of the universe today, maximum, would be 13.75 billion years. Right? That's quite an accurate number scientifically. It's been tested multiple ways, both through the redshift and through the echo. There's multiple ways to figure that number out, 13.75. Now, that sounds like an awful lot of time, 13.75 billion years. That sounds like a huge amount of time. My friends, that's nothing. That's nothing. Our understanding of chaos becoming reality, becoming organized, becoming utilitarian. There's a book called Challenge by Cyril Dom. He was a physicist, and he challenged, based on our understanding of evolution and random evolution and mutations, how long would it take for one major species to evolve into another major species? Because that's really what evolution says. Major species have changed to major species, right? We and dolphins and whales and chickens and Tyrannosaurus rexes, right? We all evolved. How long would it take for one major species based on random mutation? And the answer is over 1 trillion years. Now, that's a much bigger time. 1 trillion and billion are not like, that's not the next number up. That's just an astronomically bigger amount of time. Again, not to say we don't believe in evolution, right? We're okay. So that's the mechanism that the Creator used. That's great. But the idea that it was guided is where Judaism is coming from. And interestingly enough, evolutionary biologists bump into this quite a bit. Like the Cambrian explosion, where there was very little life, and then all of a sudden, bang, all life came in a very, very short amount of time. And the Cambrian explosion cannot be explained. It can't be explained via our understanding of mutations. Because just to understand, mutations are bad. In general, mutations cause Down syndrome, or they cause pregnancies that are not viable. They cause deformities. Certainly, they're not helpful. And even if a mutation is helpful, that mutation would have to ride on top of another mutation. Mutations are, in general, very micro mutations. So for a species to change to another species would take many, 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 many mutations. So let's get back to the point, not to get too much into the weeds over here. Is there a creator, or is this world chaos? Well, creator would scream design. The world looks designed. Maybe it's amazing that I'm here in an art gallery. I'm just realizing how beautiful. If I told you that all that came by itself, you'd say that's nuts. It's so beautiful. It's so, the waves and the way it's painted, and the sunset, and you see the atmosphere, and you see the horizon, and you see, the water, and the water goes up into the clouds, and the clouds are like buckets, and they pull the water over to dry land, dump the water on the dry land, and then the water streams back down to the ocean. Then they evaporate into the buckets called clouds, who then put it back over land and drop it on the land. Like, wow, that's a great, who thought of that amazing system of dropping water onto land by making it evaporate and carrying it in things called clouds that are lighter than air? Why do you need clouds? Well, they're lighter than air. They can carry water so that there's water on the land, so that life exists. So if I would say that this painting is not a product of accident, how much more so the real thing? There was a study, it was done a few years ago, it was on NBC, that was looking into the capacity of the human brain. And really, we have many, many millions of processes going on as we are here listening to this podcast. For example, you're listening, you're decoding the words. You're really hearing just vibrations. That's all you're hearing is vibrations that are coming out of your speaker, and the vibrations are just pressure. And the pressure are going into your ear. They're being magnified. 48 times in your ear, because really I'm speaking very softly, but your ear knows how to magnify it. You got a little stapia in your ear that's gonna blow it up, and your brain knows how to decode it. Everything that I say reminds you of everything you've ever heard in your life, and you're able to access it. And at the same time, you know what you're doing? You're regulating your blood sugar. At the same time, you know what you're doing? Your body is keeping cool. So your inner air conditioner is making sure you don't overheat. And you know what else you're doing? You're not tipping over, because your body is making micro tweaks to your skeletal and muscular system so you don't just collapse. And on and on and on and on and on. We can go on forever. Literally, that's not an exaggeration. All that is going on. How many of these wonderful Macs that I have, how many Macs would it take to process the information of any of your brains? This is a pretty good Mac. It's the new M1 Pro, right? Good Mac. How many of these Macs would it take to equal the processing power of the human brain? And the answer is over 1 million. Over 1 million Macs. You can see it. I have a website dedicated to these things. You can find it. It's a really easy name. It's called Hashem.com. It's a great name. Someone said, what in God's name is that? Hashem. I said, that's the point. Hashem.com. And on Hashem.com, I have the video of the NBC going through what we know about computers today and the brain processing power. It's amazing. So you're telling me that in 13.75 billion years, my brain evolved? The brain is the most fascinating thing in the universe. It's the most complex organism in the universe is a brain, and the most complex brain is the human brain. So in your head, not on some distant planet outside of the Milky Way that we know of, but your brain is the most amazing thing. How many accidents would have to happen for your brain to work? And what does that mean, your brain work? Oh my goodness. Well, how is information sent around in your brain? Information is racing around your brain at over 100 miles an hour, running around, accessing like libraries. Well, information is sent through electronical impulses. The only thing is, there are gaps between the synapses of your brain. The information that is running around your brain has to jump from one synapse to the next as it races around. So watch what happens. It's really crazy. The information is stored electrically. It then becomes chemical, and all the information doesn't lose one iota of its fidelity. And then when it reaches the other side of that gap, it becomes electric again. Electrochemical. Now, just that notion alone, I've spoken to neurobiologists about this one idea, and they say, "Oh, Rabbi, you know about this?" Like, are you kidding? I love this. How does that work? I'm old, so we used to use tape recorders, and tape recorder can then be made into digital recording. It takes time to take something that's analog and make it digital because it's a different format. In a much more dramatic way, information stored electrically and information stored chemically are using totally different formats. So it's racing around my brain at hundreds of miles an hour, changing from electrical to chemical without losing anything, even though it's in a different format. Really, this is my feeling. I feel like to believe in God, we just need to learn a little bit about the world. It's very glib to walk around saying, "Oh, I don't believe in God. I don't know how I feel about God. Leave the word God out. Chaos or design. Well, I don't know. Well, learn. Learn what? I had a student who was in medical school, and he started keeping Shabbat. His name was Sean. I said, "Sean, what was it that made you keep, which, was it one of my classes? Was it my beautiful Shabbat? What was it?" He said, "Rabbi, I love you. It had nothing to do with your classes." I said, "What was it?" He said, "This semester we learned about blood." He said, "If you could learn about blood and the immune system and not believe that the world is created, then you literally are shut down. You're just not paying attention." And I looked at him, I said, "Blood? Blood's red. What do I know about blood?" So I spent a few months of my own just learning about blood. And I made a few videos. You can find them on Hashem.com. I just wanted to understand what's so cool about blood. A lot of people during COVID, they learned much more about the immune system than they ever learned before, about how it stores past diseases and how it creates up to 10 million different cures that are ready in the waiting for any configuration of a virus that can come. And if it's new and it's not used to it, it learns it and then it stores it. And that's how immunity works. And you got T cells that destroy them and then destroy themselves so they don't destroy the rest of the body. Blood, DNA, all of the world's living creatures, including plant life and animal life, use the same four chemicals known as ACTG. And if you just mix them up, A, C, C, D, D, G, 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 T, you can get Sophia, you can get Alexandra, or you can get a watermelon. Same four letters make you in a watermelon. What kind of a genius thought of that to create the same four elements? But more than that, because you are DNA, that makes you information, which means that technically I could read you as a book. If I knew your genome, and there are people who have their genome, I don't mean 23andMe, I mean your entire genome, we could read you like a book. This is the book of Brooke, the Brooke book. And Brooke, you're C, G, G, T, C, and I could read you, and that's Brooke. Those letters make Brooke. Well, you know what that is? That's information. And one of the laws of information is that information can't evolve. It has to come from other information. There's a whole separate study called information, just like there's law of thermodynamics, there's laws of information. And one of the laws of information is that information must come from other information. So if you are information, which you are, you're literally information, then the information must have come from other information. Not chaos, not nothingness, not a random Big Bang made your brain and your DNA and your immune system and a walrus and a peacock and feathers that can fly. It's amazing. And it is one of my favorite topics because I'll tell you something. Well, I had a very interesting year. I had my house burned down this year. I had COVID. I ended up in the hospital. It was a tough year. And I ran a Shabbat.com this week. And I did a Q&A in the afternoon. This was just yesterday. And someone said to me, when these things happen to you, did you ever question whether God exists? And I told them, no, I never did. I never did. I've questioned whether God exists plain, not because of tragedy, just because I'm a thinking person. So I need to understand. I need to know what's the background. But tragedy doesn't change it. That's not an intellectual way. Tragedy happens to everyone. It doesn't feel good to have a house burned down. These things are hurtful, but it doesn't change reality. It's an emotional response. But an intellectual response says, I open my eyes, and if a square block tells me that there's intelligence behind it, how much more so does DNA? There's much, 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 much more to be said. We're just hitting the tip of the iceberg. I will tell you one last very deep idea, okay? And I'm gonna try not to lose myself in this idea. It's a quantum idea. Everything in the world exists in wave potential. There are waves. Waves are potential, and then they solidify into actual matter, into actual points, once they are looked at. Did anyone ever hear of the double slit experiment? So there's wave potential. It spreads out like a wave. So when the particles are shot through the slits, so they're particles, and they would make a wave pattern on the other side. But if I look at them being shot, what does that change it to? It changes it to particles. So waves mean it could go here, could go here, could go here, could go here. It's more likely to go closer to the slit. So you've got the valleys, the troughs, and the the troughs and the lows, right? You got the up and the down. The particles nearer to the slits will be higher, and further away will be lower. But since there's a chance that the particles hit there, creates a wave pattern. The only time that they become actual matter is if I look at them. Now that sounds weird if you've never heard it before. It's a strange property of quantum science. Okay. And that's the Schrodinger cat experiment said that until I open the box, this cat with the capsule with the nuclear isotope in it, the cat is both alive and dead. When I look at it, the cat is dead. But before I look at it, it's alive and dead. And that sounds crazy. How could it both be alive and dead? But that's what it means. It's got wave potential until it's looked at. So now listen carefully. You're going to love this. Okay, so what about you? Are you reality or are you just potential? What made you a particle and not just a wave with hypothetical particle potential? The answer is you became matter. You became a particle when I looked at you. So I made you from potential to reality. So who made me? He made me. Everyone needs someone else to look at them to go from being wave to particle. So it stands to reason that the very beginning of creation needs a first observer to make wave to actual matter. Understand that? That's what we call God. God becomes the first observer to make matter and particles from potential wave. And this actually answers concepts like quantum fluctuation creating the world. Doesn't happen because you've got a first observer, also known as first cause, also known as what banged the Big Bang. What banged the Big Bang? Even if that point existed, what made it evolve, right? What outside force? Because again, entropy says that even if there was a singularity in the world, if there's no outside exerting force, then the singularity doesn't move anywhere. There's got to be a force that's outside of the singularity, and we can call that God. So don't get caught up in the word God. Today, more and more and more scientists and professors are coming out of the closet and saying, you know what? I give credence. I give a platform to this potential that the world is not an accident. This is just, how do I know that the world didn't come by itself? So the cosmological constant that consistently and continuously exerts the organization on this universe, that breathed life into the law of gravity. The law of gravity needs something to breathe life into it. Otherwise, it would be not reliable either. One day we'll have gravity, one day we won't. Or dark matter. Like all these things they need something to breathe life into their laws. And that is what we call the Creator. Organized, directed, focused, until we're up to the Zoom class, where each one of you are so special and unique, and you're all the creations from a creator who thought that you were special enough to create.
Rabbi Klatzko, thank you so much for your time. Take care, my friends.
Pleasure.